Hi guys and welcome back to another video. I'm Shah and this is Thoroughly Enjoyed Books. Today I'm bringing you my April wrap-up. These are all the books that I read in the month of April. I don't like doing wrap-ups, and I've also already talked about a lot of these books already because I read the majority of them for the OWL's readathon and have therefore discussed them in my OWL's reading vlogs, which I'll leave a link to down below if you want to go and check those out. I read 15 books in the month of April, which is the most books I've read in a really long time. A lot of them were really short, but a few of them were actually quite long. And bearing in mind, I'm still working full time, even though we are on this lockdown, this self-isolation period. I still have to work 9 till 5 and I have to go into the office 1 day a week. And I was also studying for university. I had a deadline at the beginning of May. So, despite all that, the fact that I read 15 books is kind of amazing to me, but also May ain't getting off to a good start. Let me just put that out there. So I thought the way I would do this wrap up, because I've already talked about a lot of these books already, is to just go over them really quickly for you. And if you want more in-depth thoughts, go check out those OWL vlogs because I've ranted and raved about most of them in there. So even though I read 15, I only have 10 of them here, which I'm going to go over with you because a lot of them were actually audiobooks and a couple were ebooks that I had borrowed from the library. The first book that I read in April was City Psalms by Benjamin Zephaniah. This is a collection of poetry, and Benjamin Zephaniah is a Birmingham-born Jamaican poet. He writes a lot of spoken word poetry and slam poetry, so a lot of the poems in this book actually have online counterparts. So if you go to his YouTube channel, you can actually see him speaking a lot of these poems, and they're phenomenal. He has done a lot of work on the Black experience in the UK, which is fascinating. He's wrote a lot of books about racism and culture, and they're so interesting and just powerful reads. But this was the first thing I actually had read by him, and I was really impressed. I really enjoyed it. It's written phonetically, so it can be quite difficult to read at times, but if you speak it, because all poetry is written to be spoken, but his in particular, if you speak it, you really get the gist of what's being said. So this looks at race and justice and class and being British, and it's just a very powerful collection. I really enjoyed this. The next book I read was an audiobook, and it is the first Tessa Dare book I've ever read, and that was Romancing the Duke. This is the first in the Castles Ever After series about a young woman who inherits a castle. However, when she turns up at this castle, she discovers that actually the previous owner hadn't exactly given up his rights to it. So the two strike up a friendship of convenience, which is working together to help uncover what happened, what went wrong, how come our main characters have ended up in the situations that they are in. I've completely forgotten the names, sorry. Basically, the Duke has gone blind and he doesn't understand how his home has been sold and then given as inheritance to somebody when he still owns it. There's a lot of humour in this book. There's quite a lot of scenes where our main character is the daughter of a famous author, and there's a lot of fandom around her father's work and a lot of cosplay involved, even though this is set in like the 1800s, which was quite amusing to me. I found it really entertaining. I really enjoyed this book, and I think it's a great place to start with Tessa Dare because I will definitely be reading more when I get the chance. Then I read One of Us Is Next by Karen M. McManus. This is the third book by this author, the third book I've also read by this author, and she is one of my auto-buy authors. So she writes young adult thriller, crime, mystery novels. I'm not quite sure how you'd classify them, and they all follow a murder. Now this is a sequel to One of Us Is Lying, which I won't spoil. I really enjoyed that book. There are some issues with the mental health representation in that one, but overall I really enjoy it. This book has sent the white balance everywhere, sorry. This is a year after the first book, and we are following a game going on at the school of Truth or Dare, which is put in place to mess with people, and it's all about them carrying out these truths or these dares, and eventually somebody dies. My problem with this one was that the mystery didn't really kick off until halfway through, and it was quite slow in that regard. However, when the mystery did get going, I really enjoyed it, and the last page, and I literally mean the very last page, it was amazing, and I think we're going to get a sequel to this one. We need a sequel to this one because it ended on a cliffhanger. The next book I read was really disappointing. I read this with my friend Hannah, who I'll leave a link to their blog down below. We were both really excited about this book because we were promised lesbian pirates, or sapphic pirates at least, and so many problems. And that was The Unbinding of Mary Read by Miriam McNamara. Now, this book does follow lesbian pirates. It is about Mary Read, who is a famous pirate who had disguised herself as a boy for most of her life because her brother had died and her mother wanted to use her to basically get money. She meets Anne Bonny. In real life, she meets Anne Bonny as well. And in this book, they have a romance. However, there was so much about this book made me so angry, particularly in regards to sexual violence. There's a lot of sexual violence in this, which I kind of expect when I'm reading about female pirates, because a lot of the time, the female pirate is the only female that these male pirates have any communication with at any point on the seas. So I always expect maybe a little bit of sexual, not even necessarily violence, but maybe something that's a bit uncomfortable sexually because them being the recipients of the only male attention. However, this just felt like the violence towards main characters was because they were gay, because they were in a relationship, and it was disgusting. I hated it. So I'm thinking of doing a full rant review for this book, because like I said, I wanted to keep this nice and quick. This was a very disappointing read. This is the most disappointing book I think I've ever read. I then read another audiobook, and it was The Unholy Munis by Christina Lauren. This is the second Christina Lauren book. I enjoyed the first being Josh and Hazel's Guide to Not Dating, which I read right at the beginning of last year. I think I even enjoyed this one more. I loved it. I adored it. I thought that this was so much fun. It was full of so much chemistry between the two main characters, and this basically follows our main character. I'm crap at names again, so sorry. The main character's sister has just got married. However, at the wedding ceremony, everybody gets food poisoning except our main character and the groom's brother. These two hate each other, or so it seems, and they end up taking the honeymoon that their siblings were meant to go on. Obviously, whilst they're on this holiday, they fall in love, they clear up some miscommunication between them, and it's just lovely. I know a lot of people really dislike miscommunication as a trope. It's actually something I really like because I find it really realistic, and I think it's done really well in this one. I really enjoyed it, and I just find Christina Lauren's writing to be so much fun. I know they're two separate people, but I think that the way they craft stories together are wonderful. Then I read The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde by Robert Louis Stevenson. This is a classic gothic horror novel or novella, and I was very let down by this. So I was meant to have read this several times throughout my university experience and just never got around to it. I find gothic literature to be very hit and miss. I really enjoy modern gothic. However, I just really don't like the historical, the original gothics, and I just think they're written in a way I don't really enjoy. The story of this was a lot less exciting than I thought it was going to be, and it's a lot less based in science. I think from film adaptations, TV shows, and pop culture, this is shown as more of a laboratory style setting, whereas that's all in the background, and a lot of this is just told from a diary that's uncovered like towards the end, and I just didn't love it. I then read Noughts and Crosses by Mallory Blackman. This is a book that was picked as a 5-star prediction by one of my friends in a video I did recently. I'll leave a link to that down below as well. This was definitely a 5-star read for me. I adored this book. This is a speculative historical fiction. This is basically told in an alternate world where the white people are the ones who have been oppressed for generations, and looking at the world through that lens. So we get to see all these different experiences that black people in our real world experienced, but because it race switches them, it gives a whole new perspective. I really enjoyed this book. It made me really uncomfortable at times. I recognise a lot of the experiences because I studied civil rights when I was at sixth form for my A-levels, and it felt really provocative. It was really well written. It was really engaging all the way through, and I cannot believe that I didn't read these when I was younger. I then went on to read the next book, which is it the next one I've got or the one after? Anyway, I'm going to talk about that book soon, and I just think that everybody should read these. They're great. I then read this very small collection of poetry. This is Come Close by Sappho. This is another book that was sent to me by my friend Hannah. I read this in the bath and really enjoyed it. It's a very quick collection of poetry. It looks at gods and goddesses and womanhood and sexuality and is just perfect. If you didn't know, Sappho was an ancient Greek poet. I think she's the only female writer whose work has survived, if I remember that correctly. And she was from the island of Lesbos. So you've heard the term lesbians, you've heard the word sapphic and how they relate to women. So I guess you can put 2 and 2 together with Sappho's link to them. I then read another ebook. This I downloaded from my library, and it is Blue is the Warmest Colour. This book was interesting, and this basically follows a young girl who is come to terms with her sexuality and her relationship with this other woman. It's very difficult for the both of them, and I don't really want to say much else without giving the plot away. I don't think you can say too much else without giving the plot away, but there is a lot of illness in this book as well. So if you struggle reading about illness and people dying, this is one to maybe stay away from if you're not in a good mindset. And it kind of has a look at sexuality and what other people think of relationships, and should you really, you know, base your relationships on other people's thoughts and all that kind of thing. And there's obviously some issues with coming out to parents who aren't supportive and all that kind of thing, so it can be a difficult read. There is a film which I watched years ago but really don't remember, so I want to rewatch that at some point, but a very, very difficult read, but again, one I did enjoy. I then read Knifeedge. This is a sequel to Noughts and Crosses, also by Mallory Blackman. I didn't love this one as much as Noughts and Crosses, but I still did really enjoy it and thought the conversations that were in it were spot on, so important. There was one particular plot line where Sephi, our main character, joins a band, which I think could have just been scrapped from the whole thing. It didn't really add anything other than a few tensions which I think could have been put in other places. It also has quite a lot of mental health discussed in here, particularly postnatal depression, which I thought was really well handled, and I think seeing different characters' point of views of this was very interesting and very difficult as well. I didn't quite understand Sephi's motivations for a lot of things in this book. We also get another side character's point of view in this book from the first book. So we get Callum's brother Jude's point of view, and he's killed a black woman, and everything that goes into that is very interesting as well. It's really hard to describe this book without actually spoiling anything, so I'm going to stop there. But once I've read this whole series, because I've requested the rest of them from my library, I am going to do a full discussion video. But still really enjoyed this one, not as much as the first book, but we'll be continuing on nevertheless. I then read Convenience Store Woman by Sayaka Murata. This is about a 36-year-old woman who has worked her whole life in a convenience store and has no aspirations to ever get a different job. In Japan, there's quite a big culture of work and getting a good job, and this is completely at odds with what is expected of her. At some point during the book, our main character Kiko meets a man who seems quite abrasive. I really didn't like him, he was awful, and it basically follows their relationship. I didn't like it at all. A lot of people love this book, a lot of people say it's really light-hearted, and I definitely see that for the first maybe quarter of this book. I really enjoyed reading about Kiko and how she really enjoys working at a convenience store and find it really poignant, especially now when so many people are, you know, undervalued for working in supermarkets, but they're the ones we're relying on right now. However, I just didn't like the second 2/3 because I didn't get it. I think that's what I'm going to have to say. I just didn't get it. So this was very disappointing as well. And I read this because it was my in real life book club book for that month. I listened to another audiobook, and that one was Serpent and Dove by Shelby Mahurin. This is about a world in France. I think it's a historical fiction. I'm not 100% sure if it's meant to be our world, but it's meant to be in a French setting. About a young girl called Lou, who is a witch, and a man called Reed, who is a witch hunter. And as punishment for something that Reed does, he is forced to marry Lou. However, nobody, or it seems nobody, knows that she is a witch. And this book is trash. It is pure trash. It's enemies to lovers, which I'm trash for. This book doesn't make any sense. There are so many plot holes. Apparently you can smell witches, but this man can't smell his own wife, even though he is a witch hunter. There are so many coincidences where it's obvious that she is a witch, but nobody picks up on this, apparently. And it just doesn't make sense. However, I loved it. I loved the last maybe 20% where the relationship literally goes from we hate each other to we love each other. There's no in between, guys. Don't read this book thinking that there's development or anything like that. But it is trash, and I am trash for it. I then read another graphic novel on ebook, which is Jade Days. This one was recommended by Jean from Bookish Thoughts. She has been reading this series, absolutely loving it, and it's set in a British university. So a lot of it feels very real, and it's very raw because I miss university so much right now. And I enjoyed it, but I didn't absolutely love it. It basically just follows three girls who are thrust together their freshers week of uni and become friends, even though they've got completely different personalities. None of it makes sense, but it's really enjoyable. I'm going to read the next book. I struggle with graphic novel series because I never follow up with them. So this is one I read purely because it was in my library. No, I requested it from the library and I don't know what to think of it. I'll try another one. I don't hate it. I'm not enthralled with it yet. We're getting there, guys. We've got 2 more books. Then I read The Miniaturist by Jessie Burton. This is about a young girl who gets married to an elder gentleman who gives her a dollhouse, or it's called a cabinet, set in 1600s Amsterdam, which is fascinating to me. I love historical magical books. Now, the way this has always been sold to me is that things start happening in the dollhouse that reflect real life. That's not what it's about. This is about a girl gets the cabinet and then she starts ordering things for the cabinet. However, she starts receiving things that she didn't order and doesn't understand why, and they're very detailed, so they're dolls of people involved in her life that she didn't ask for, and they're very detailed, and she doesn't find out until much later how detailed they are, because there might be marks on them or some sort of detail that doesn't make sense when she first gets them. But as she gets towards the bigger events of the books, she sees how the dolls replicate this. Does that make sense? This was phenomenal. I enjoyed this book. This was another book that was picked for me to read by a friend, by Shannon, and this was another 5-star predictions book. So go check out that video because I'm really excited to read those books. This also got a 5 stars from me. I know I don't talk about ratings very much, but I do tell people when they're 5 stars. So yeah, I love this, and this just really drilled into me that I do love historical fiction. I will give a warning, the N-word is used provocatively at one stage in this book. Obviously I've got no experience with the word, it's not a word I would use anyway, and it is set in the 1600s. However, I don't know how some people might feel about that. It is one instance, and if that is something that bothers you and you're interested in reading this book, maybe ask me and I'll explain the context of it, because I know some people aren't comfortable reading it at all. And then the last book I have is The Silent Grove. This is a Dragon Age, a graphic novel that I reread in the very last hour of the OWL's readathon. And if you watch none of my Owls vlogs, just watch the 5 minutes of the very end of this vlog, because it was stressful. It was so stressful. I basically messed up and didn't have a book to read to complete my last OWL, and I might have cheated on this still because it was to read a book with a beak on the cover, and I've classed this as a beak, and I don't know if that is classed as a beak, but I've classed it as one. So this is based on the video games. I love the video games. They're my favourite video game series of all time, and this is set after the first 2 games, I believe. So I can't tell you anything about it really without spoiling anything. But these are basically canonical. Depending on choices you make in the games, the first game has a different ending, which will make this guy a king or not. However, canonically, he's considered to become the king. So there we go. So that was my wrap up. Definitely wasn't as quick as I wanted it to be because this raw footage is over half an hour long. So those were all the books that I read in April. Let me know in the comments if you've read any of these books, and if so, what did you think of them? I can't wait to hear your thoughts. As usual, I will leave all my links down there as well. Go and check me out on Twitter and Goodreads and all that good stuff. And I can't wait to see you in another video very, very soon. Take care. Bye.